Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I am Tara Setmayer and this is the Rick Wilson, and we are broadcasting live for the first time, from our fancy new studio in an undisclosed location. There he is, the Rick Wilson, in our fancy new
Hey
digs
Tara, how
there.
are you?
I'm doing great. Looks good over there in
I
our
wore a jacket
undisclosed
and
location.
underwear to celebrate.
It's the first time, everyone, that Rick Wilson has to wear pants while we are actually broadcasting live. I'm just kidding. We are 20 days away from the election, 20 days, less than 3 weeks, which is hard to imagine at this point because it feels like we've been going through the election season for, I don't know, 5 straight years because it just never ends. Tonight, we will be joined by Emory Professor Carol Anderson, and we will be talking about voter suppression and other things with her, just an issue that not a big deal going on right now. It's a huge deal. So stay tuned for Professor Anderson. She will be our first guest. And of course, we will be joined by our Lincoln Project brethren, Stuart Stevens and Reed Galen, later on in the show. Now, as always, if you want to chat with us, ask us a question, be sure to hashtag AskTheBreakdown, send in your questions for us, or if you have a question specifically for Professor Anderson, be sure to say so, and we will ask a few viewer questions of her while we have her. So, hashtag AskTheBreakdown. As always, you can go old school, my favorite, voicemail. We love to hear from you. You can call us at 701-203-1208. We did start live callers last Friday, but we will be bringing that back later in the week. So no live callers tonight, but it will be back later in the week. So that will be back, we promise. Well, Rick, we've missed a lot, so we're going to get right to it. Meanwhile,
Let's do it.
I can't sit in the basement and say, let's wait this thing out. I'm not going to do that. And now I'm immune, they tell me. I'm immune. I could come down and start kissing everybody.
Excuse me.
I feel so powerful. I'll walk into that audience. I'll walk in there. I'll kiss everyone in that audience. I'll kiss the guys and the beautiful women and everybody. I'll just give you a big fat kiss. I'll kiss every guy, man and woman, man and woman. Look at that guy, how handsome he is.
Rick, I mean, how hopped up on God knows what was he at that rally?
You know, the whole thing about the kissing seemed more like a threat than an offer. These rallies are a pandemic hotspot. We know it. It's going to be a nightmare from hell for these people, and he's going to be traveling around the country. He's ordered his campaign to do this every day. For the next 19 days. And the amazing part of it is, you look at these pictures from the first few rallies in his rumspringa he's having right now, and these people are largely maskless. We're going to be able to model the COVID outbreaks following this guy around. But look, it's a desperate move. He's desperately trying to get his base back right now. And I don't know, you can call me crazy, but I've been to a couple of the rodeos for presidential elections in my career. And I've noticed that the end of October, seems like a little late in the ball game to try to rally your base.
Correct. This is not the time to do it. You've got literally less than 3 weeks. And short of, I don't know what really, with this election. I mean, those of us in the political space always are very sleep deprived in October because you never know what will happen as the election gets closer.
Yes.
Thus the October surprise. But this entire Trump presidency, every week there is an October level surprise coming out of this administration. And pretty much every single day there's something else. Some other bomb goes off, but nothing seems to be swaying the election in Trump's favor. He's hemorrhaging voters, particularly women voters, and his performances at these rallies, I really don't think is getting them back much. And his response to COVID has been atrocious. Even before he contracted it. Now, since he's contracted it, I don't know. I just don't see how he turns it around in any significant way.
Well, we never take anything lightly around here at the Lincoln Project. We view the fact that he's behind right now, he's suffering right now, that there's a lot of chaos in his campaign right now. These are all good things. These are all good predicates. There's a good place to be. You'd rather be in Biden's position than in Trump's position. But there's no reason to let up. There's no reason to stop pushing forward. There's no reason here to take a break on what we're talking about in the coming 18, 19 days about the work level that's going to be required. And I think there's something happening in the states right now where you are seeing this broader collapse of Trump's numbers, the softening in his numbers. Even in Georgia today, you're starting to see polls where Joe Biden is not ahead by 1 or 2, but by 5 or 6. You're starting to see a number of the Senate races slipping out of their hands. And so, you have Mitch McConnell in a panic last night, spending $22 million to try to protect vulnerable senators. Like I said, you'd rather be in Joe Biden's position than Donald Trump's by a long way, but we're not quite done yet. We still got a lot of pushing to do in the next 19 days.
In fact, we do. But Donald Trump seems to think he's been cured.
The vaccines are coming soon.
He's
the
immune.
Therapeutics, and frankly, the cure. All I know is I took something, whatever the hell it was, I felt good very quickly. I don't know what it was. Antibodies. I don't know. I took it. I said, I felt like Superman. I said, let me at him.
Let me just tell you about how absurd, asinine, and dangerous this is coming from Donald Trump, okay? He's running around now. Well, for those who didn't see it, there was a report in the New York Times from some very reliable sources that Donald Trump wanted to put on an act when he left the hospital and pretend that he was very feeble, and then rip open his shirt and have a Superman t-shirt underneath it, like a WWE skit. This is the way the President of the United States is behaving after contracting a deadly virus. Now, he was one of the lucky ones that survived it because he had 14 doctors and he had the best possible experimental treatments that no one else in the world has ever had. And he's hopped up on steroids. Most average Americans don't have that opportunity. Most people don't have 14 doctors, specialists, the best there is from all over the U.S. medical community to treat them. So the fact that Donald Trump is running around these rallies, dancing like an ass to YMCA and Macho Man, and the absurdity of that speaks for itself, as if this is, no big deal. 214,000 Americans dead, so what? He's literally dancing on the graves of these people. And now the White House is moving forward with this medically dangerous herd immunity. The idea, I'm sure viewers have heard this before. It's an idea that's been floating around. It's considered a very maverick approach to this and potentially deadly. As a matter of fact, people who are well respected in the medical community have said some pretty unequivocal things about herd immunity. They've called it a recipe for carnage, quote, a massacre, quote, or mass murder, quote. These are all from respected doctors, epidemiologists, specialists who know what's going on here. It has been widely rejected in the scientific community. And this is what the White House is putting out. They are going by something called the Great Barrington Declaration from these three doctors who didn't use it. There's no footnotes. It wasn't scientifically vetted. This is what is herd immunity. It's basically letting everybody live their lives, and the younger folks, the people who are supposed to be less vulnerable to this, they get it, and you get immunity from it because you don't die. And you segregate the older population, the people who are more, or the people who have pre-existing conditions who are more vulnerable. And somehow this is supposed to, like measles and other things, you're supposed to become immune to this once you get it. This doesn't work, number one, without a vaccine, which we don't have yet. So the fact that this administration is pushing this quack idea of herd immunity that could kill millions of Americans before you achieve herd immunity is insane. And it literally tells you that they are not taking American lives seriously. And we have the upper Midwest that is on the rise. There's no state in the country right now that doesn't have that has a decrease in cases. There are increases everywhere. And in Wisconsin, for good's sakes, they're getting ready to build field hospitals again. This is where we are. And that's what the president of the United States is talking about. Rick, your reaction?
Well, Tara, there is a mathematical modeling that looks at, if you want to pursue the herd immunity equation, that on the lower boundary of it, you lose 2.5 million people. That's 2.5 million dead Americans. That's what Donald Trump's people think is a terrific plan. On a slightly higher boundary, you could lose up to 5 million Americans. Actually, a little higher than that, given the current infection rates and fatality rates. If the idea is you infect everyone to give them herd immunity, and it culls out a certain number of people, no president should wake up in the morning and say, hey, my plan, where I could easily do the things with masks, social distancing, and closures, is just too much. It's just too much of a hassle. But this idea you're going to, without a vaccine yet, which is still, by the way, everybody, we've had 2 vaccines, both the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the Eli vaccine this week, be delayed. If the idea is that you're going to end up giving people herd immunity by killing 2.5 to 5.5 million Americans, you're not a president. You're a psychopath. This is insanity level stuff. And Peter Navarro and Scott Atlas and Jared Kushner have had all these discussions in the White House about this with the same kind of moral vacuity that was apparent when Jared and his commission on March 21st said, well, we'll let the blue states suffer. They don't like us anyway. We won't do the testing there. We won't roll out as much testing there. This is not a morally defensible position for this White House or any White House. But the horror of it is that until we get to a position where we've got a vaccine, none of it's going to work out unless we are disciplined as a country and do the things we have to do in terms of social distancing, masking, and closures, and hand washing, and all the boring stuff that Trump world seems to think insults their freedom. That's freedom with a dumb on the end, America.
Exactly. And I just want to read a statement from Dr. Collins, the head of the National Institutes of Health, who knows a thing or two about this. This is exactly what he said about it. This was in the New York Times today. He said, this is a fringe component of epidemiology. This is not mainstream science. It's dangerous. It fits into the political views of certain parts of our confused political establishment. I'm sure it will be an idea that someone can wrap themselves in as justification for skipping wearing masks or social distancing and just doing whatever they damn well please. It's impractical, unethical, and potentially deadly. There you have it. So we'll let the American people decide. I don't know about you, but I'll be wearing my mask. On that note, let's move on to our guest tonight.
There's the segue.
Speaking of wearing masks and tossing them off.
Never gets old.
It never gets old. It
never gets old because I'm 12.
But the thing about it is that's what he practically did that, for goodness sakes, on the balcony when thus Covita. Go and watch it if you haven't seen it yet. All right, let's bring in our guest tonight. Our guest has a lot to say about Donald Trump and what's going on with voter suppression in our states, particularly in the state of Georgia, where she is a professor at Emory University. She is also a best-selling author of several books, including White Rage and One Person, No Vote, How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. Professor Carol Anderson, welcome to The Breakdown. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you've written extensively on these issues, and there's a shocking amount of voter suppression going on in 2020 in the United States. From one drop box for 5 million people in Harris County, Texas, to the lines that we're seeing in Georgia with record-setting early voting. But even before that, with the Stacey Abrams, Brian Kemp election, the gubernatorial election, where there was all kinds of shenanigans going on there. Talk a little bit about what's the difference between voter suppression, is that what we're seeing, versus just snafus and the unpreparedness of some of these states because of COVID and the changes in election. Which one of these is really voter suppression versus that?
And so voter suppression is when you target a community, a constituency in the American electorate, and have a series of laws and policies to ensure that they cannot vote, or that the barriers are much higher for them to have to go over and jump through to be able to vote. And so when it comes to long lines, part of what we're seeing, and this is clearly documented, is that in predominantly white areas, they have more equipment, more poll workers, and so that their time in line is much shorter. Whereas in predominantly minority neighborhoods, communities, is that you have fewer equipment, fewer poll workers, and the lines are longer. So that the study shows that in during the primary in Georgia, is that minority communities had on average a 51-minute wait, whereas white communities had a 6-minute wait. So that's not by accident, that is purposeful. The long lines we're seeing today, purposeful. It is about, they knew that the equipment was bulky, it was difficult, they didn't have enough space, they didn't have enough machines, all of that, purposeful. They knew that the first day of early voting was a holiday, purposeful. So all of the things that they're saying is that, well, you know, this is just enthusiasm and they had other options. No. This is deliberate.
Right. When you talk about the long lines, I interviewed an author named David Litt, and he wrote a book called Democracy in One Book or Less. And he talked about how long lines are, in fact, a deterrent, and how he used the example of a good example of how you can be proficient with lines. And he used Disney World as an example, and how they've created a way to make it fun to be online for a long time, because you're online for a long time oftentimes. But he actually did a study, and there's empirical data that shows for every, I think it was half an hour you stand online, it actually does suppress voters, because they don't want to stand there. They have to get back to work. So long lines are, people may not have thought about that before, but it is actually a form of voter suppression.
It is.
Let me ask you really quickly, and then I'll let Rick jump in. So a lot of people are unfamiliar with what happened in 2013 with the Supreme Court and the Voting Rights Act, and how some of those provisions changed the way that states can do different things with their voting. Can you talk about how that was impactful and what we're seeing now? And also, as far as the Republicans are concerned, the 2018 ruling that basically, I think it was a consent decree that removed some of the 40 years of restrictions on Republicans, because the party back in 1982 got caught deliberately doing voter suppression. How these two things combined are impacting what we're seeing today?
I love that question. Thank you. What we saw in 2013 was that the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, Shelby County v. Holder, gutted the Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which was the pre-clearance section that provided the standards under which a state or jurisdiction would have to come under, that they had discriminated so deeply against their citizens' right to vote, that any voting law that they wanted to have had to be okayed first by the U.S. Department of Justice or by the federal courts in D.C. This emerged out of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, what we think of as Selma. Well, when the U.S. Supreme Court gutted that, within 2 hours, Texas implemented a voter ID law that the courts have repeatedly said was racially discriminatory. You saw the states immediately just jump on putting in a series of things like I said, these voter ID laws, which are based on the lie of massive rampant voter fraud. They had started closing polling places. So there are over 1,600 polling places have closed since then. Over 1,200 or so have been in the pre-clearance states. What happens when you move a polling place? We've got the research on it. When you move a polling place, a tenth of a mile, each tenth of a mile that you move a polling place from the Black community, Black voter turnout goes down by 0.5%, up to 4 miles. And when you're dealing with people who don't have access to transportation, what that does is that suppresses the vote. We saw the cutting in early voting days. So you had legislatures like in North Carolina and in Florida hunting through, looking for the days that African Americans used early voting the most, like souls to the polls, where they would go from church and then go right to the voting booth. And having those legislatures just cut those early days out. There were a series of these kinds of mechanisms, and they worked. They worked. Black voter turnout in 2016 went down nationally by 7%.
And that's the first national vote since that ruling, correct?
Right. That was the first presidential election without the protection of the Voting Rights Act.
Which states did that apply to? Because I don't like, just so that the viewers know what states, and they'll hear some familiar ones where there's problems now.
Right. So, we think of like the usual suspects, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Louisiana, Texas, and then there were 39 counties in North Carolina. But you also had some in Arizona. You also had some places that were really bailed in. Arizona was one of those later on, but there were communities in California, communities in New York that were also bailed in because of demonstrated discrimination against their citizens' right to vote. With the consent decree, you asked about that too.
That the Republicans.
Yes. With the consent decree, you had the RNC, the Republican National Committee, was under a consent decree because they had hired off-duty police officers, put them in uniforms, and had them go into minority precincts in New Jersey, like in Camden and Trenton, and basically harass voters who were standing in line. Well, you can't do that. And so there was a consent decree that the RNC was under, and they kept having, they kept doing things. And so, but they let the consent decree lapse, and now we've got the call for an army of Trump.
That's Rick. I'm going to bring you in here because that idea about the consent decree and the intimidation at the polls sounds an awful lot like what the Trump administration is doing, trying to recruit this Trump army of poll watchers, and all this money that they're investing in this is straight out of this playbook, because now they're no longer under that consent decree. Rick, does that sound familiar? Like, can you remember how some of those things were instituted?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Professor, one of the questions that I think is unique to this moment we're in right now is the scope of the legal actions the Trump campaign is trying to take before the election to suppress the vote, in terms of trying to disqualify mail-in balloting in various places, to restrict the number of days you can wait after the postmark, and of course the things in Texas, which the Lincoln Project was involved in very directly this week, where we joined in amicus in the suit against Governor Abbott, restricting the number of early drop boxes in the various counties. I mean, we really haven't seen anything this overt and systematized in a very long time. I mean, you used to have it, as you were pointing out, more in individual states, but this is from the White House. This is from the Trump campaign, from the top down, isn't it? It's broader than anything we've really seen before.
Absolutely, and having this administration actively calling for that the election is rigged, sending the signal to discredit, delegitimize the election before it's even begun, to say that after, I'm going to win on election day, and then the Democrats will steal it with mail-in ballots, knowing that in many states, you can't count the mail-in ballots until election day, so that the count is going to take longer because of the pandemic that he mismanaged, is that people are pushing themselves into using mail-in ballots as a way to honor their right to vote and their right to be safe, to be healthy. So the calamity that he created, he is now creating another calamity by yelling rigged, fraudulent, corruption.
Right. Well, let's bring up that statement we had in the Texas case, if we've got that element on tap. There we go. So we got very involved in that case. Of course, it was ruled against us in the Fifth Circuit. There are a number of groups in Texas right now that we're allied with that are going to be pushing very hard to continue to fight the governor on this. This is one of those fundamentals of free and fair elections. He is trying to reduce access to the polls, to reduce access in particularly in minority communities. It isn't even obvious, Governor Abbott, and I know, Greg Abbott really wanted to be president someday, but I'm going to tell you, if your reputation becomes that you're willing to disenfranchise enormous African American communities and enormous Hispanic communities, especially in Houston and Dallas in the metropolitan area, you're not going to be president. What you're going to be is in court for a very long time, Governor. So it is one of those things that I think that he will regret this over the long haul, but right now the only thing they care about is making Trump happy. And so you're seeing this kind of thing happening in Florida, in Texas, in North Carolina, and other places where Republicans are doing their very, very best to unlevel the playing field.
That's right. And not only that, they're broadcasting it. I mean, there was a story written back in May about how the RNC was raising money, $20 million at the time. I'm sure they've raised more since then, to employ lawyers to be prepared for the court battles. The goal was 50,000 poll workers. And we see what the Trump campaign has been doing over the last few weeks with the fraud and the join the Trump army. I mean, it's clear what they're trying to do. And then you have the Council on National Policy, which is one of these secretive conservative groups that's out there telling people, don't be afraid if you're called a voting suppressor, as wearing that with a badge of valor. That's not what this is. This is you're protecting the vote, when we all can see right through that.
Right.
Professor Anderson, I have a question for you about what's happening in Florida, a very important state, key swing state. This whole thing, and maybe a lot of people may not know, but this whole thing about felons being able to vote, and how Michael Bloomberg invested a lot of money to pay off the fines that these folks who have had felony convictions have served their time, and in order to get their voting rights restored, they have to pay their fees or sometimes, I guess, like reparations for whatever they did. Why is that looked upon as a poll tax of the old days? Like, why is this so nefarious and another way of issuing voter suppression, particularly in Florida, Republican governor, key swing state?
And because you had this incredible ballot initiative that basically provided for the reenfranchisement of these returning citizens. And it passed by 65%. Immediately afterwards, you had the Republican legislature, DeSantis, trying to figure out, how do we stop this? Because what felon disfranchisement meant was that 40% of Black men were not able to vote in Florida because of a felony conviction, and over 20% of African Americans, overall African American adults. And so what they did was they said, okay, it says you have to complete your sentence. Well, fines, fees, and restitution. Well, that means you got to pay, but you don't get blocked from voting if you haven't paid your property taxes. You don't get blocked from voting if you haven't paid your income taxes. But here they are linking your ability to vote with your wallet, with your wealth. And the decision in the 11th Circuit was the absolute worst because it said, yes, you do have to pay. This is not a poll tax. And the state does not have to tell you how much you owe. So imagine this crazy catch-22. You want to vote. You've got the funding to vote because people have been pouring into the fund, but the state doesn't have to tell you how much you owe.
That's crazy.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it's all at the
you're from
county
Florida.
court. Most of it's done at the county court level. It's an incredibly opaque process. No one understands it. And the intention of the voters in Florida was not, we're going to restore the rights of felons who have served their time and have been judged to no longer be a danger to the community with all these conditions. It was, we're going to restore the rights of these people as long as they're no longer a danger to the community and they've served their time. And the idea that the court cost thing is going to hold up many, many tens of thousands of African American men, primarily. The disproportionate impact of this is, I think, quite absurd. But this is a state that has a governor right now who is willing to right now lay down on the railroad tracks for Donald Trump and do whatever they want. So I know many of the people that were involved in the initial ballot question who did not go out of this thing thinking that they wanted to make it a 27-step process for these former felons to get their rights restored. They viewed it as a one-step process. So it is definitely a source of great consternation and pain for African American men, primarily in the state of Florida, who are looking at this as a sort of bait and switch.
Before we go to questions, because we have a question or two for you, Professor Anderson, this issue of segregation and voting suppression and things came up during the Amy Coney Barrett hearings. And Lindsey Graham had a couple snarky things to say where he just talked about how, referring to the good old days of segregation. Roland.
Did you think Brown versus Board of Education super precedent is that you're not aware of any effort to go back to the good old days of segregation by a legislative body? Is that correct?
That is correct.
I don't even know why he would joke about something like that. There's nothing funny about that. People died at horrible, horrible experiences, especially in the Black community, over fighting for voting rights. And for Lindsey Graham, a senator from South Carolina, which doesn't exactly have the greatest history on civil rights, it's just remarkable. He came back and said, of course, that he was joking about it, but I don't know why you would joke about something like that. What's our first question for Professor Anderson? Can people in California remove the fake ballot boxes and drop the ballots off at a legal drop-off? What can be done ASAP as the GOP will not comply to the CNA order? Thank you. Ask the breakdown, please. Need a video about the toothless Senator John Kennedy with lots of dirt. Rick, take notes. Can you talk a little bit about that and what happened in California?
So you have in California, the GOP set up these fake drop boxes with signs that said official drop boxes for the absentee ballots. And then they said, all we're doing is ballot harvesting. So it again, you get this craziness because they say they're against ballot harvesting. They've put up these fake boxes where people would drop their official ballots. It's illegal. It's illegal. And it requires that the Attorney General of California mobilize the forces to remove those boxes and to charge those who put them there. One of the things that has to be put back into our system is accountability. And now's a good time to start.
That is that example of in California with the fake drop boxes, and I mean that is it's shocking that they would be that blatant with it Right, Rick? I mean, we've seen some crazy shit in our time with stuff like this, but this is way beyond like stealing yard signs.
That's turning the crazy shit knob up to 11.
Exactly. Oh my God. Before we let you go, we have an ad where we're talking about the guardrails of democracy have been challenged, and we're worrying about this peaceful transition of power. And let's take a look at the Lincoln Project ad transfer.
Thank you, Mr. President, for taking off the mask. Thank you.
There won't be a transfer.
For threatening America with violence when you lose.
Stand back and stand by.
Demanding only your votes are counted. For trying to rig this election and intimidate voters. For embracing the tactics of the tyrants you admire. For trying to use those tactics against the American people. Thank you for making sure every American knows exactly who and what you are. Because we're perfectly aware you aren't joking and you aren't trolling anyone.
Can't tell a joke with these people.
The future you and your pet senators want is just as it appears. But your time is nearly up. Your legacy and your place in history awaits. A legacy of failure, a blight on our history. Defeat is coming. Accountability is coming. We are coming.
We are coming. We will vote. He will lose, and he will leave. Professor Anderson, that's right. He will leave. I will give you the last word before we say goodbye. Any last words to folks out there that are worried about voter suppression or things that they can do, pay attention to in their communities that you want to make sure everyone remembers and knows?
Yes. Vote. Be aware of long lines. Bring your bottle of water, your cell phone, a battery pack. And if you deal with intimidation, call the hotline, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And they will send in the team to help you.
Great. And we also, later on in the show, will be talking about our call to action. It's wonderful to see how many organizations are out there to protect the voter. So you will have many, many options, thank God, in case there's any chicanery going on at your voting place. Professor Carol Anderson, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check out her books. She's written a couple of them. It is One Person, No Vote, White Rage, and Eyes Off the Prize, among others. So be sure to check out Carol Anderson's wonderful books. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
All right. Rick, we get to segue onto our next segment.
We get to segue. There it is.
It never gets old.
Again, I'm 12 and that will never get old.
Oh, I had a hand in it. I wanted to have the mask thrown off, so I'm guilty of this too, because it's just, you have to laugh or else you'll cry. Let's bring in our Lincoln Project brethren, Reed Galen and Stuart Stevens. Gentlemen, the president appears to be on the defensive in every major battleground state.
Go
ahead, Rick.
Tara, before we start, I just want everyone to know that we are in a secure COVID pod. We are tested constantly. So we're not wearing masks at the table tonight. We wear them in public at all times. But we are we're the members of the fraternity of having your nose poked with a swab every few days in our special pod here. So welcome, Reed and Stuart.
Thanks, Rick.
To the fabulous new set.
Very nice.
And
nice work.
Here we are. So Tara, I'll throw it back to you.
Yes. No, I'm glad that you put that disclaimer in, because you know people would be tweeting at us going, "You guys aren't socially distancing. This isn't unfair. You're a bunch of hypocrites." So there's a disclaimer, everyone. It's a COVID-free environment. Of course, we practice what we preach, unlike the President of the United States. So back to what we were about to talk about, fellas. He's on defense in every sense of the word. He's losing in battleground states. They've got him on prompter at rallies now because he's just a liar in chief. And the idea that he's going to stick to a teleprompter at this point in the campaign is absurd, but it goes to tell you how desperate they are. The president's all over. He's going to kill himself at this rate, but he's trying to go to a rally every day from now until Election Day, from Pennsylvania to Iowa to Florida and everywhere else in between in these battleground states. Is he only campaigning to his base at this point, Reed?
I think he'd have to, because I don't know how many other people want to listen to him or see him in person. The idea that even now, after the president himself has been infected, folks are willing to go stand cheek by jowl, maskless. In a lot of these places it's still warm, right? I just can't imagine that it is, a good idea. Health-wise or otherwise. I think he's probably on teleprompter because they need to remind him of the things he actually needs to say in the course of an election. And then one last thing, just Tara, as an old advance man, the idea that he's only doing one rally a day, like that does not speak well of him or his campaign. At this point, normally, a candidate is doing 2-3 stops a day in multiple states. And so, I think he is frankly at a reduced schedule. This is not as high a schedule as most candidates would have at this point.
Right. I mean, look at, I remember in 2000, W was hammering at this point. It was 3 big things a day.
Right.
And you guys were like leapfrogging from one event to the next event. To the
Portland,
next
Maine to Portland, Oregon,
right.
24 hours.
Exactly.
But we should have stayed in Florida a little longer.
Well, we got to go spend some time there
after that, though,
afterwards.
didn't we?
Yeah, so.
It seemed like a good idea. At the
Yeah,
time.
no, I got 5 weeks in Palm Beach. It was a lovely, lovely way to spend November.
It's a good time of year.
Yeah, exactly. Less humidity than other times of the year. What about the idea of stopping the bleeding with the hemorrhaging with women, Stuart? Trump seems to be, I guess, part of his prompter preparation is this idea that you have to reassure the suburban women. Let's watch the clip and then you can react after.
I ended the regulation that destroyed your neighborhood. I ended the regulation that brought crime to the suburbs, and you're going to live the American dream. So can I ask you to do me a favor? Suburban women, will you please like me? Remember? Please. I saved your damn neighborhood, okay?
Stuart?
Well, Mark Cuban famously said that Donald Trump's that guy at the bar at closing time will say anything. And that's his version of it. His whole concept of what the suburbs are today is completely outdated. I know a lot of women, as I'm sure you know more, who live in the suburbs. I don't know any that like to be referred to as suburban housewives. I mean, most of them that I know have 2 or 3, 4 jobs. And I don't know anybody that would like to think, give an example for their children, that if someone moved in next door of a different ethnicity, a different religion, that they wouldn't be welcomed. It's this whole outdated concept of some Shangri-La, Never Never Land that is tied to the basic conceit of Make America Great Again,
right.
At a time when it wasn't great for a lot of people. I don't think it works. I mean, it's sort of like a comedian saying, laugh, I'm funny. I mean, you're supposed to tell the jokes and earn it.
Please clap.
And what really strikes me about this is there's no policy in this campaign. There's not talking about anything he's going to do. He's saying, I saved your neighborhood, so that means that you were living in a neighborhood that was being destroyed. I mean, it's not coherent. And normally, a candidate would be out there talking about what they're going to do in a second term. And it's weird for Trump because he'll promise anything. At this point, he was saying Mexico was going to pay for a wall. Now Mexico won't even let us in. So it's just a really strange, bankrupt campaign that they're doing. And Reed's exactly right. The idea that one rally a day is a big deal. I mean, he's on a geriatric tour.
And he's going to places like Macon, Georgia, right? Like, I mean, Macon, Georgia is not exactly what I would call the swing area of the state.
It's not exactly like an Antifa hotbed in Macon, Georgia.
No. So, but I would also say that, to extend on Stuart's point a little bit, is that, the looking to the past and the inability to speak to the future are sort of classic authoritarian ideas, right? You have to go back to some time that never existed. That's better for you. It's got to be a campaign of eternity, because you can't speak to the future because A, you can't control it, and B, you don't have any plans for it.
Yeah, and there's always an amorphous enemy out there and whether it's the people who were going to destroy the suburbs, who of course in Trump's head are always brown, and
sometimes they're black.
Well,
just to be fair,
shades of,
right.
But
people who don't look like you.
This is what we saw. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Fairly. Yeah.
We're as white as they come.
Yeah.
We are.
Really.
This is
truly
truly like we are the whitest white boys in America.
Yeah.
But that idea that there's an enemy out there, that idea that there's going to be this transformation of your neighborhood, your city, your state, the country into something you don't recognize. It is, as you said, classic authoritarian fear mongering, and that constant drip of terror. It's why Antifa was their hot flavor for a few weeks. It's why the caravans were their hot flavor in 2018. They're always looking for some kind of scare tactic to drive voters back into their warm and comforting arms.
And of course, the real irony of this now is there is something to be afraid of. It's COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, COVID is killing people at this alarming rate. The University of Alabama football coach Nick Saban now has COVID. This is real.
All right.
And when it starts affecting University of Alabama playing Georgia, this is going to get really real for the South.
Florida LSU this weekend.
Florida LSU is canceled. So it's this sort of neverland that they're trying to create and campaign in a world that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I would say this, Tara, hello to your
Tara
cat.
is suffering from cat tifa.
Hello to your cat.
He has something
but
to
I
say.
think that for most of, I'm sure he does. All cats do. I'm sure for most of his life, Trump was able to create the world he wanted to live in.
Sure.
And even for the first 3 years of his presidency, he really got away with it.
Yeah.
But COVID doesn't care about his. Your cat is adorable. What's your cat's name?
His name is Tiki. Tiki.
What does Tiki
Yes.
think about Donald Trump?
Tiki, what do you think about Donald Trump?
This is what I really have to say. Well, according to Donald Trump, he's probably already voted for him because there's massive voter fraud.
That's right.
Right.
He's already voted for Joe Biden.
Dogs and cats voting together.
I think those of us who worked in the Republican Party, what we really have to remember, this is the fault of the Republican Party. I mean, Donald Trump is Donald Trump, but it's the Republican Party that accepted Donald Trump. And they're the ones, these senators in these states, these governors in these states, where he's going in and holding these death tour rallies. It's really unconscionable. It shouldn't be allowed. And the sort of greater good here, particularly it was this whole conservative notion of do no harm as government, was sort of a primary principle of it. And we just abdicated that.
But I think the other side of the do no harm piece is that, and I would say this of any government, regardless of its formation, is that a government's first job is to protect its citizens. And if it cannot do that, then it is not doing its basic function. And so there was the do no harm part that I thought Stuart is absolutely right. But the flip side of that is if you're not going to do any harm, at least protect us.
Right.
And he's not doing any of that.
And it's ironic that Trump has always looked at the power of government, the power of the state, as something he very much wants to exercise. He wants to be the strong man, wants to be the authoritarian. But strangely with COVID, first it was indifference and denial and deception, and then it was just chaos and noise. This is a guy who really thinks that he should be able to tell a company where they should be able to build a factory or what they should be marketing, as witnessed when he was going after Carrier and Ford in the beginning of his administration. But now he just seems completely unable to grapple with the legitimate exercise of government power, which he should be doing with CDC and HHS and all those other things. But he's a guy who will do an executive order to make sure kids are put in cages, but not that PPE and testing equipment are distributed across the country.
Well, I think there's an underlying cruelty that comes with the guy too. He likes to utilize authority, but he seems to favor it when it is objectifying a group of people or inflicting, potential harm or violence. I mean, look, if you send unnamed, masked federal agents into the street someplace, you're going to get a fight. That's going to happen.
Yes.
He knew exactly what they were doing, and so you're right. And because it has to line up with his vision of who he is, as opposed to what's good for the for the country at large.
Exactly right.
I think one thing that's not getting enough credit here is I think the Biden campaign is really running a good campaign.
Yeah, for sure.
No,
They're not getting suckered into this.
Right.
They're very disciplined, and they showed this in the primary. I mean, to go out as a primary front runner and stumble as badly as they do, and not do something crazy to change the campaign, even though it probably doesn't work, that takes tremendous discipline.
Yeah.
They decided they were going to win or lose with who Joe Biden was, and damn if they didn't win. It's really quite impressive, and I think it bodes well for their execution in these last stages of the campaign.
Well, and I would also say that between Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar in the hearings this week, there are a lot of folks who voluntarily ended their campaigns to ensure that Joe could get the nomination, who I think have done a pretty terrific job of introducing themselves to a lot of Americans who maybe didn't get a chance to see them during the primaries, and I think that will benefit them down the road.
I think we were talking about this the other day. It's the ultimate counterfactual. What if Jeb and Marco and Ted and everybody else said, this guy's too much, the chaos level is too high, a bunch of us have to get out so we can clear the field and somebody can kill him off politically. That's what the Democrats did, which is not something you think of. They self-sacrifice of the Democratic campaigns and candidates. Look, it's hard. And that field looked so clustered for so long. It looked like Bernie and Biden were the outlier characters for so long. They were going to hold, all those other people could have sniped away at Biden, and they chose not to.
That's a really good point.
Which is really something that's kind of remarkable.
I think that Trump has always benefited from the inability to imagine Trump.
Right.
For sure. There was that death struggle to just get one-on-one with Trump because the Republican Party was not going to nominate somebody who was a failed casino owner who talked in public about having sex with his daughter.
Right.
Like, we were not going to do that. Yeah. I mean, that was unimaginable. Yeah. And then,
and yet here we are.
And
here we are.
I tried. I tried to get some Republicans to run his favorite sons against him.
Yeah.
And they all said, and it wasn't crazy, it was just wrong. Look, if we, the establishment, put our thumb on the scales, when Trump loses, we'll get blamed. It's not going to be because he's a racist. It's not going to be because of the alt-right. It's going to be because of us. And then I'd always say, well, okay, but what if he wins?
Right.
And they go, well, he's not going to win. And I didn't think he'd win, so I wasn't very good at arguing the
Right.
opposite. But Trump doesn't have that going for him now.
Right. He really doesn't.
He's all too easy to imagine because he's been in our face so much for so long.
Right.
And we've seen the death toll. We've seen, and if you're a Republican Party activist right now, there are 718 seats that the Democrats have taken from the 41 the Republicans have lost in Congress to everything else down to dog catcher, state Senate, state House, county commissioners, sheriffs. 718 seats were lost in the last 3 years. If you think that's good for your party, if you really want to keep a consistent party with a farm team that feeds people up the chain, then you're out of your damn mind if you embrace that. But they should. Their failure of imagination continues. They still can't believe it's going to be this bad.
One thing I point to, guys, and working in politics like you do, you can appreciate more than most. There's that other Republican Party out there. Those really popular governors in blue states, right?
Yeah.
Charlie Baker.
Charlie
Scott,
Baker
where
today.
you work so much in Vermont. Yeah. Charlie Baker, Larry Hogan. I work for all these guys. I love these guys. None of them, as popular as they are, can pick their own state party chairman.
Correct.
I mean, that is just so. I mean, that's like saying Belichick can't substitute a player. Right. I mean, it's just unimaginable. Yeah. But it shows how deep Trumpism has become in the party.
For sure.
Yeah.
And how difficult it's going to be ahead. And I think hopefully we can be part of it to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Another example of that is pivoting to another issue that's related to this. It was Trump and China. How China became all of a sudden the boogeyman, and that was a decision that was made early on to distract from Russia and Russian interference and Donald Trump's ties to Russia and all things Russia that seemed to come up constantly concerning Donald Trump, including in campaign ads, by the way. And he keeps bragging about his response to COVID and what a wonderful response. And his daughter was out there, with her that asinine, breathless voice of hers, bragging about how wonderful her father did in his response to COVID, and talked about how the China ban. It was all about the China ban, and no one else did that, and how he did it so soon. Rick, I think you have some things to say about China and the China ban and Donald Trump.
I mean, look. First off, Tara, I will have to correct your pronunciation. It's China.
Yeah.
As the president says, China. But look, I want to take a moment and just lay waste to this bullshit on three fronts. First off, the assertion that he blocked travel from China immediately. Well, 47,000 additional people came back from China after the moment he declared this alleged ban, which is the barn door is wide, swinging wide, and the horse is gone down the lane. The second thing is the idea that Donald Trump has won anything in this ludicrous trade war with China is absurd. As any economist will tell you, this has been China getting their way over and over again. The tiny victories Donald Trump claims to have accomplished are ephemeral promises that may or may not work out in a 5-year window. And the damage that it's been done to our economy over Trump's hostility about China is remarkable. And it always strikes me as that it's one of the weirdest and most telling things. This is a guy who claims he hates socialism, but he starts a trade war against the principles of free trade and free markets with China, blocks the purchase of Chinese products and vice versa, so farmers in the Midwest go bankrupt. Then Trump borrows money from the Federal Reserve, e.g. China buying our T-bills, to give those farmers a payout. I mean, if there's a socialism problem in this country,
$50 billion.
There it is, writ large. So,
I mean, and also, the human toll of that. Farm bankruptcies as high as they've been in years. Thousands of tons of crops rotting.
Right.
Because they couldn't be shipped. I mean, remember that Trump nominated the former governor of Iowa to go be his Chinese ambassador because he was friends with the president of China.
Right.
Like, how's that worked out?
Yeah.
And we should not forget, tariffs are a tax increase.
Tariffs are a tax increase.
On us.
As a conservative, you should realize, folks,
we
that
used to say that.
that a tariff is a tax on an American consumer.
Right.
Right.
And I also want to say one last thing about Iowa. Joni Ernst has been absolutely supine with Donald Trump on the trade issue. She has not fought for the voters in Iowa or for the farmers in Iowa. The soybean market in Iowa has gone to hell and gone. The corn market also. And this is partly because Joni Ernst has stuck with Donald Trump at every step of the way. Like a lot of these senators should have walked in the Oval Office and said, God damn it, Mr. President, you're wrong about COVID. Stop this shit right now. Cut it out. They should have also, a lot of these senators from farm states should have gone to the president and said, this trade war is insane. You are hurting us. There are record farm bankruptcies. You are destroying the fabric of communities across the Midwest. Stop it, cut it out. But instead, what did they do? Oh, yes, Your Majesty. You are the greatest. Our rapid response guys put together a little piece about China. If we could bring that up.
I think we've done an incredible job between the ventilators and stopping very infected people from China coming in, meaning putting the ban on China. I cut off China very early, and if I didn't, we would have a chart that you wouldn't believe. I shut down the United States to people from China when I banned travel from China.
President Donald Trump did what no other American president had ever done, and that was he suspended all travel from China.
What happened was that 40,000 people came out of China because we didn't ban the residents and citizens from coming in. So we created this rush, and we didn't have the ability to test or quarantine those people. And so that seeded the disease here. The ban probably accelerated that the way it was executed.
All of the evidence we have indicates that travel restrictions and quarantines directed at individual countries are unlikely to keep the virus out of our borders.
We made a life-saving move with early action on China.
What happened was that 40,000 people came out of China because we didn't ban the residents and citizens from coming in. So we created this rush, and we didn't have the ability to test or quarantine those people. And so that seeded the disease here. The ban probably accelerated that the way it was executed.
We made a life-saving move with early action on China.
This we like to say good night to Rick Wilson. He had to hop off at 10 o'clock. He had a hard out because he's in high demand. So it is Stuart and Reed and I. We will close out the show. Just to put a button on the China conversation before we move into viewer questions. Not only has Donald Trump done all of these things and ceded the trade war to China, hurt our farmers. There's, in addition to record farm bankruptcies, there's also record farmer suicides as an outgrowth of this and the economic hardship, which is awful. In Iowa, I've been nerding out again, watching football on Sunday on Iowa station, so I can see the ads, and Joni Ernst is getting killed on the trade issue and her fealty to Donald Trump and not taking care of Iowans. So her opponent out there is hitting her hard on that, which is why Iowa's even in play. I mean, Trump won Iowa by 10, for goodness sakes, last time around. And in his response to COVID, Donald Trump praised President Xi of China, 15 times early on. 15 times he complimented him, because at the time they were trying to work out this trade deal, if you want to call it that, or some type of an agreement. And he went on. He said how Xi was very transparent and working hard, and that his strong response and efforts would help COVID go away soon. He said that his strong leadership was an example of a successful operation in China. This is what Donald Trump said about China. Meanwhile, as things got worse here and he wasn't doing what he was supposed to, it was all about the China virus, the Kung flu, all the horrible things that Trump has said and not taking responsibility for in his failed response. And you know what else Donald Trump did early on, now that we know, thanks to the Woodward tapes, that he knew how deadly COVID was. He knew that it was airborne. While we were suffering with a lack of PPE, lack of masks, ventilators, protective gear for our first responders and Americans, Donald Trump authorized 18 tons of PPE to be sent to China on February 7th. And they were proud of it. Secretary Pompeo actually tweeted out a photograph bragging about how we were sending aid to China. So whenever you hear Donald Trump complain about the China virus and COVID, just remember that he's full of shit, and his ineptitude has cost us tens of thousands of American lives. So while China had our PPE, by the way, in the beginning. Let's move on, unless you, Stu or Reed wants to add to that. We're going to move on.
Let me share you. I'll share a little personal story about the effectiveness of the China ban. I was overseas in March when the China ban had gone down earlier, and they were about to close off flights from Europe into the United States. I flew back from London. I would say maybe a fourth of that flight was full of Chinese citizens who had flown to London to fly to the United States. So there was no problem with them getting in. It was just a few direct nonstop flights that he banned. It was a completely ineffective ban.
Yeah, and remember that he's happy to take on China as a country and the Chinese Communist Party, but he loves him a dictator, right? Yeah. And he loves the debt that they haven't made him repay, and he loves the trademarks that they gave Ivanka. So remember, this is a guy who's always going to leave himself an out. And he did the same thing. Unfortunately, it cost Americans a lot of lives. And let me just say also, Tara, on the Midwest piece is, I think when you talk about not only the farm bankruptcies and the suicides, but the fabric of the country has been torn asunder, and it's going to take a long time to put it back together. Yeah. And so, like, for all of us, whether or not it's us sitting at this desk or you sitting there, or folks around this country, like, it's going to take all of us a lot of work. This is going to take work on all our parts to get this back to where it needs to be.
Absolutely. And that's why we do what we do. A lot of this is motivated by helping to give our supporters some solace, knowing that we are here as a vehicle to be the voice of those people who thought they couldn't do anything, or their voice didn't count, or their vote didn't count. It does. And we try to reassure that every single day here at the Lincoln Project, and let people know that it does matter. And this won't change unless people are activated and go out there and vote. We're going to take, before we wrap it up, we're going to take a couple viewer questions. Guys, we're going to keep it like as a lightning round. So we'll have answers short and sweet before we leave tonight. What's the first question? All right. Tiki the cat needs his own segment during that. I'll see if I can. I'll see if
Yes.
I can
Yes.
arrange that. We might have to do the Tiki files.
Yes.
What's the next one? For the people who want to help boost Senate races as we hit the home stretch, what 4 Senate races do you recommend donating to? Reed?
Well, I'll give my 4, and then we'll see if Stuart agrees. Dr. Al Gross in Alaska, Teresa Greenfield in Iowa, Sarah Gideon in Maine, and Jamie Harrison in South Carolina.
I'll just add one to that, and that is Mike Espy in Mississippi.
Yeah.
My home state. I think that I think Secretary Espy can win this thing, and that would be historic, and it'd be great for Mississippi.
You've been saying that for a couple weeks now, Stu. A lot of us did not have Mississippi on that map, so there's a lot going on down there. And now, as another anecdote to Reed's point about Jamie Harrison in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison raised $58 million to Lindsey Graham's 27 or $26 million? Half of that.
Yeah.
Right, Reed?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand that, like, as a federal candidate, you have limits on the amount of money you're able to take, which means that there were millions of people giving him money. And it shows not only what a great candidate Jamie Harrison is, but, I mean, Lindsey Graham may be the most loathed person in the country ahead of Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. And that's really saying something.
Indeed it is. And my mom, a lifelong Republican, white woman, suburban woman in New Jersey, gave money to Jamie Harrison recently because she despises Lindsey Graham that much. And it seems that my mom isn't the only one.
Right.
So we're coming for you, Lindsey. We have one last voicemail. Let's hear it.
Okay, with all the insanity, I felt the need to go a little lighter, and I probably wouldn't ask this question except that I've seen other people ask the same thing. So a few of us have started to develop with every show a little more of a celebrity crush, and we kind of want to know if Rick Wilson is single. My name is Annette.
We will plead the fifth. Rick's not here to answer for himself.
I don't know. He'll be back tomorrow night. You can ask him then.
Yeah, we'll ask him tomorrow night.
There's websites that answer
promise.
that question. Whole entire website.
Right.
Fan sites.
Yeah. But I will say, Tara, that I'm glad that we have built such a rapport with our audience that they now are comfortable asking these questions, the hard questions.
Thank you for sharing.
Indeed. Next thing you know, they'll be asking boxers or briefs, courtesy of Bill Clinton circa 1992. Reed and Stuart Stevens, thank you guys for joining. We'll see you later. Get back to work, kicking ass and taking names.
Thanks, Tara.
Good night, guys.
We will.
For some reason, it blows my mind. We have a president in the United States who, openly mocks people who wear masks to include his political opponents. But will make fun of reporters for wearing masks or say, I can't hear you with that mask on, or things like that. He's doing everything in his power to mock individuals for taking not their safety seriously, but the safety of other people. So, a White House reporter in the press room wearing a mask is not necessarily worried for their own safety. They don't want to spread COVID, which we know is asymptomatically transmitted, to other people who are in that room, including, I might add, the President of the United States, who is standing at a lectern less than 15 feet away. So, it's unfortunate. And, it gets to the inadequacy of Trump for the moment. He is, to paraphrase, the Princess Bride, right? He's not a man of action. He's been able to sort of, shirk his way out of responsibilities and to get by without paying bills, by, cheating in both professional and personal relationships, throughout his entire life. And he went immediately to what he knows, and what he knows is being dishonest. And what would have saved lives would be
rough 4 years. You can say that again.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.